Hi and welcome to a brief presentation on some concepts around service design and delivery as opposed to the more often utilised term caseload management. Early in my career I somehow earned a reputation as someone to talk to about caseload management, which was always difficult because the things I wanted to talk about are things that are quite removed from the term caseload management. So my title of I will talk not about caseload management, but about designing things in a different way. I'm a firm believer that we have to get better at being precise about what the purpose of an action or activity is. Purpose really explains the reason I'm trying to convey this information to you and the reason that you've also chosen to select this session to have a look at. So to be clear today, my purpose is about the idea of changing our vocabulary. And the reason that we want to change our language is to start changing our underlying mental models in order to not be able to just deliver a service using the scarce resources that we have available, but to really start designing services whose impact is bigger than the sum of its parts. Reflecting on these outcomes, I want you to really see how deeply I want to go in exploring vocab and the terms that we use around this concept of caseload management. And that's because vocabulary is one of the essential aspects that hold our assumptions and give us a narrow lens that we don't even realise it's part of our subconscious way that we view our world without really understanding how much of other information we're blocking out. That lens is probably best described by Senge in this quote here. As a simple illustration of how our choice of words and language deeply shapes the outcomes that we seek, Edward de Bono provides this illustrative story. He tells a story in New Thinking for the New Millennium as that NASA space program in the early days had an issue with not being able to have a pen that worked in space. So they spent a lot of time, resources, intellectual thought and money in designing and working through this issue to design an amazing space pen that works in zero gravity conditions. And of course, it's also said at the same time that the Russian space program was facing a similar concern. But when they spoke about their problem or their issue, they actually put it in the terms, we need something that will write upside down. And so they used a pencil. So it's just a nice simple illustration of if we use certain words, sometimes it skews our thinking. An example of this was in the early 1990s when I led a team of speeches in Bunbury. And with some simple tweaks to our service system, we were actually able to reduce our waitlist dramatically. And that may have been where my reputation as a person to speak to about caseload management initially developed. One of the strategies we used was to implement advice clinics. 20 minutes where we caught up with a family newly referred to us to see what their purpose was in seeking speech pathology services. Over time, when we shared our ideas and the things that we were doing to reduce our waitlist, then we received fairly heavy pushback and negativity about the term advice clinics. Finally, one of the services said, Kendra, come and show us what you do when you do this thing you call an advice clinic, because it doesn't work when we try it. We set up 3 advice clinics in their area, and the therapists all watched me through an observation mirror. I always like to call those sudden dramatic light bulb moments as aha moments. After my very first advice clinic, they grabbed me and said, Kendra, you didn't even try to screen or assess them or do anything like that. Why would I? I was catching up with the parents and having a brief chat with the child to offer options they could make a start on while we got greater clarity on what they were actually seeking. Because there's actually a lot of family can access to help their child without waiting for my judgment. So it turns out, despite our using the term advice clinics, therapists had heard it and just replaced it internally with their interpretation of a very short assessment session. So my lesson was learned. We must drill down into language deeply if you want people to interpret a new idea in the same way as you do. I'm pleased to see recent growth in the ideas of early entry or soft contacts emerging again, but I hope that we spend some time talking about these ideas as new techniques, not just new words to describe old methods. Let's go back to that word I've used a few times, purpose. One thing I find difficult to understand when talking about service delivery is how poorly we state the purpose of that service. What is the service attempting to achieve? And if you read the caseload management literature, it appears that it's all about reducing waiting lists and increasing throughput. So really is this discussion around having multiple single points of impact on each family that we go through. I don't think we've got much evidence to suggest that increased throughput actually has a good outcome for families we're rushing through the gate. And we certainly lack evidence to capture just how much of a resource a client needs to be able to have positive incomes for them. On the other hand, our current philosophies are full of huge big purpose statements and clear descriptors of the role we have as professionals. So these approaches herald exciting opportunities where we're able to take our personal skill sets, the techniques and toolboxes we carry with us, and to look at how we can contribute to designing inclusive services that have the potential to have an explosion of impacts across universal environments and events that both directly impact on singular points of contact, as well as broad, far-reaching changes having multiple impacts beyond our even limited reach. For me, this is a purpose that I feel inspired to work towards. But we have a bit of a problem, because with all of this lovely new language and ideas, we've retained a very old, very linear model of service delivery. It's called many things, but often just a simple pathway defines the steps a family works through or on their journey with us. So let's have a think about some of the words that we use typically in this pathway model. We use the term referral, and while we accept self-referrals now, rather than always requiring a family or client to go through another agency, we don't really support a self-determination ethos when they still have to go through this concept of getting a referral through to be able to see us. Surely they're actually just requesting a service for us or asking what steps they need to take to be able to enter our service. The NDIS trials are reflecting a better step towards this, with families and clients selecting service providers. For me, we have a simple terminology. We either ask families to have a referral to us or give families the opportunity to select us. And what we know is that some of the most vulnerable communities are resistant to the referral process. But if we start to ask the question in terms of why aren't they selecting us, we could probably come from a much broader design platform to address these issues. Assessment. This is a big one. It's resource intensive and it contributes to a glut of resources in the early stages of our service. One word particularly jumps out of me from this definition is the word judgment. We mentioned before why vulnerable communities don't select us. Here may be one of the key reasons. How keen are you going to be to enter a judgmental system? Sure, we all know what we mean by assessments as professionals, and the purpose for us is very clear, but our mental model of the word assessment and our community's assumptions about that word are potentially wildly different depending on experiences. And I think too, because we call them assessments, the traditional tools we use don't reflect a strengths-based identification process and don't necessarily make a point of clarifying the person or family's actual needs. Intervention was one of the hardest ones for me to give a definitive definition. It wasn't nice and crystal clear. Most definitions only describe the base word to intervene. A search shows up words such as interference, coming between others, and a sense of trying to help. But I don't think it's a terribly conducive word to instill in somebody the mental model that you want to be collaborative and to be focused on inclusion when we use this term. I prefer to consider that I have a skill and knowledge set that I can offer to clients and families to help them perhaps achieve a skill, to gain new knowledge that helps them, to achieve a new experience they've never had before, or to develop feelings such as confidence, enjoyment, and safety. And that's the reason for my role in their journey. Our final word of the pathway is often that term of discharge. So this suggests that we expect families to make a journey through our whole pathway, and then we are the ones in judgment of whether or not they could leave. Again, it's old language and it really needs to shift and change. What's wrong with the concept of families at different points in time being active or inactive? Why are we so afraid of having a large number of families that we know need services at any one time, but not to have them all active or at that time either? We need to understand who it is that we're actually seeking to support and make a difference to within the community. I give an example, and this one is fairly well descriptive of or rooted in that concepts around the responsiveness to intervention approach that is probably more prevalent in America. So this is just one example of how we can step back and redesign and change the whole structure of what we're doing to maybe make a broader impact. In this example, the community has chosen to select a service and we meet with them to clarify their needs. And then, because we've spent some time getting to know our external partners and we understand them and their strengths and weaknesses as well, we're able to tap families into the different programs, activities and opportunities that are in the community with our external partners already. So that's sort of the first point of contact. And this gives the opportunity for those vulnerable communities who choose not to select our service approach, but actually are engaged within these programs and activities and opportunities, to have some sense of connection and that we are aware of them, that we're building our external partners programs to best support them. For the families that have selected us, we would then offer them the opportunity to come back after a certain time period to say, so how's that working? What changes have we seen? Check back in with the family, and maybe we see that they are making changes and shifts just based on that program or activity that they've engaged within. And so they return to that for another burst of time. Alternatively, at that point, we might say, actually, no, we need to put some modification in here. So we design some modifications and work with our partners to just change and shape their programs to better meet a couple of individual needs, but at the same time with implications back to all of their program and activities and all of the children involved in that. And then there's the opportunity for a further check-in where we continue the modification pathway, or we start to identify those families and clients who really do need a little bit more intensity from us at that point in time, where we really need to step in and facilitate their engagement and participation and shape that a little bit more. So you can see that this is just one example of changing the way that we could view the world and the way that we deliver things currently. With the opportunity to design and take on new language, our services may operate quite differently. Suddenly in this world, the idea of a huge waiting list could be perceived as even more exciting and supportive of our service design model, because it reflects greater scope for even more external partners to join us. If I'm going to offer a service, then I want to look for ways I can have multiple impacts on families and the community around them. So I'll need new words, new ideas and new designs. It's exciting, but only if we can really shake up our clinical mental models and start viewing the world through some very different windows.